Hi, my name is Theo. I'm from the Student Learning Support Service and I'm here to explain to you and talk to you about smart reading, specifically why we read and what we read. Right. For most people in the university, when we read, we think about the purpose of reading. In other words, we ask ourselves, why am I reading this? Now you may say, I'm reading this because my lecturer forced me to, or my lecturer wants me to. The thing is this, thinking about why you're reading is very important because unlike reading for pleasure, when you understand why you're reading, it makes a lot of difference. Generally, if you are reading for pleasure, right, you could be reading to learn new things, or you could be reading for ideas and inspiration, and you may read for enjoyment and happiness. Finally, you could be just reading because you want to escape from the real world. And that's all good because that's reading for pleasure. But in the university, things may be a bit different. In the university, we may be reading to extract specific information. For example, if you are reading to find out more about, say, photosynthesis, all right? And your focus is just on photosynthesis. So you may want to have a different approach when you read. Or you may be reading just to find out a general overview or background, and that also changes the strategies which you use. In other words, when you try to find out the overview or background, you may want to glean over the information just to have a general understanding. You may be reading to dissect or to understand or to analyze difficult or complex ideas. And this is a bit more tricky because often when you read to do so, you need to read slowly. You need to find out the different aspects and how one idea relates to the other. So this often requires a little bit more analytical thinking as you read. You may be reading to get viewpoints or opinions from others. And this is a skill which is also important because when you read to get viewpoints and opinions from others, you want to read carefully, and as you read, you want to think and apply your critical thinking skills to find out whether, or to figure out whether what this person has written makes sense and why it makes sense or not. We may also want to find out what's the difference between reading for entertainment and study. And researchers basically have done a lot of research in these areas, particularly with a specific focus on how our brains work when we read for entertainment versus for study purposes. And what they have found out basically is that when we read in the university, when we read to study, the cognitive processes in our brains are very different. For example, we may think about inferences, all right? We may read something and we think about what is the other meaning or the meaning which the author intended behind specific sentences or the way the author has written something. We may want to think about the metacognitive comments, in other words, how something has been thought about, all right? In other words, the thinking process behind the comments. Then how we associate what we read with other materials as well. We also want to think about paraphrasing because we want to think about how you want to transfer the information which you have read into what you will write later. And you also want to think about the evaluative comments. In other words, when you read, you want to evaluate what you read. So your brain is working really, really hard as you read. And all this is important because at the end of the day, all these brain cogs going in circles basically means that your final comprehension performance is expected to improve. What should I read in university? Hang on. Before talking about what you should be reading, we should start with, before you start to read, what should you think about? Generally, before you start reading, think about the assignment instructions, the response, and the format which is required. In terms of the instructions, think about what you are specifically asked to do. You could be asked to describe something, you could be asked to compare something, you could be asked to criticize something, you could be asked to analyze something. Think about what specifically you have been asked to do, because that will determine how you read. Think about the kind of response which you are supposed to provide. Is it supposed to be in 300 words? Is it supposed to be a short essay? Think about the format which you are supposed to produce. Is it supposed to be, say, a laboratory report? Is it supposed to be a reflective essay? Is it supposed to be a case study? Now, all this will change how you read. So it's very important that you figure that out. You also want to think about the length of the essay. In other words, how long the essay is supposed to be. That's important because ultimately you can then determine how much you need to read. Now, before you start reading, you may also want to consider the area of study. In other words, are you in the arts or the sciences? Both disciplines may require different types of reading skills. So people in the arts may want to apply more critical thinking skills or persuasive skills. How did the author persuade you? How did the author convince you? Whereas those in the sciences may have skills which are very different. For example, how is the process conducted? What is the methodology behind something? All right. Often, these are all the same across both disciplines, but sometimes they tend to differ depending on what you need to do or what the assignment asks you to do. You may also want to consider the level of study. In other words, if you're an undergraduate student, the depth of your reading will naturally be different from a person who is doing a PhD, who will need to read a whole lot more and who will need to apply many more reading skills. Now, let's go on and discuss what you need to read. Of course, you need to read books, and books are generally in the form of textbooks or recommended readings, usually the kind of stuff which you can find from the library. You can also read reference materials in the form of dictionary, thesaurus, or the encyclopedia. Those are actually good places to start off with because that's where you understand the definition of certain terms. That's where you start to get a little bit more background information. And you may want to read scholarly journals because scholarly journals are written by researchers. And when you read scholarly journals, you want to go for the latest which you can find because those will give you the latest research in whatever field you are studying. Then you may want to have a look at specialist organizations because specialist organizations could also contain specific information which are specific to your discipline. For example, if you are from nursing, you may want to go to the Nursing Board or Nursing Association's webpage or website. That could have certain relevant information for you. For example, a code of ethics. You may also want to have a look at newspapers or magazines. However, if you look at newspapers, you will need to read very carefully because some of the articles in the newspapers could be opinion pieces which may not have credible evidence. What you can do is to go to the next module, and the next module is reading with efficiency. Deals with skimming and scanning, and learning how to do that is going to help you improve your reading speed and to make it more productive. You may also want to check out one of the other sessions, which is note-taking. Note-taking is very closely related to reading, all right? And you may want to think about, do I write with my hand and a pen, or do I type with a laptop or an iPad or a tablet, right? And I hope to see you in the next module.